Good afternoon. Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining the farming podcast brought to you by Private Property. My name is Mbali, and I am at my farm, Green Terrace, all the way in the east of Johannesburg. Thank you once again for joining. And today we're going to be talking about greenhouse farming. So it so happens that I'm actually sitting under a greenhouse. We're just doing some preparations here, but we're going to talk about greenhouse farming. And if you don't know what a greenhouse looks like or a tunnel looks like, it's pretty much what's in the background, what you see. So the black bags that you see are just growing bags that we're busy preparing on, because we're not farming directly on the soil. We're using a form of growing medium, which is sawdust. But specifically around greenhouse farming and our topic today, I'm just going to answer a couple of questions that we received in the past. And we also had another tunnel farmer, Byron Burson, a couple of episodes back, where he alluded into his operation and discussed certain crops that he's farming in his greenhouses, etc. But I think on this podcast today, I'm just going to be covering more questions in a more extensive manner, because on Byron's conversation, it was also encompassing his story and his journey as a farmer. So without further ado, I'm just going to shoot right in, and feel free to also engage and ask questions, and I'll be sure to answer them as I go along. And so the first one is, what is greenhouse farming? So greenhouse farming, or sometimes known as tunnel farming, is just basically farming under cover, under protection. And the reason why you want to do that is because you want to protect your crops under extreme or severe or excessive weather patterns. That could be excessive hailstorms, extreme um, advantage is that you're able to maximize your square meter on the ground, or maximize every square meter in which you're producing on. So basically, greenhouse farming allows you to farm vertically. So even if you were farming on, for example, 1 hectare as opposed to 10 hectares, you could still get a lot of production out of that 1 hectare, as opposed to farming the same crop in 10 hectares. But this is all dependent on the type of crop that you're farming. So the advantages of greenhouse is that you're protecting your crops. You could farm all year round. You're farming more intensively, so trying to really maximize your water, your soil, any natural resources that you have on the farm, and that you can increase your yields in a very small space, in which you'll be producing on. And sometimes some farmers prefer to invest in greenhouse farming, for their hydroponic systems. So you can definitely farm using the hydroponic methods under um, um, shade net structures or in greenhouse structures. So these are just some of the advantages of greenhouse farming. The disadvantages of greenhouse farming is, off the top of my head that I know, is that not every single crop is viable for greenhouse farming. So typically you'd want to put in up greenhouses or tunnels in your farm because you want to farm high value crops, but not every high value crop does well under greenhouses. I know from experience, having farmed baby marrows before. I've tried putting baby marrows under the greenhouses, but it's not viable because I find that the bees don't have access to the plants to come pollinate, and you get a lot of fungi and powdery mildew that exists on the plant. So if you're farming or producing baby marrows, which is considered to be a high value crop, I think it is best produced or grown outside. However, so this is just one of the disadvantage in that you cannot grow all types of crops in greenhouses, simply because of the way in which greenhouses are constructed. And the other disadvantage is that it is capital intensive. So, farmers typically give it about 3 to 5 years lifespan for the greenhouses to be in good condition. And it all depends on how you maintain it and treat it over the years. And so if you don't budget accordingly for every third year or fifth year for your greenhouses for maintenance, to replace any of the plastics that may have been damaged over the years, it can be quite capital intensive for you to maintain. And so these are just some of the disadvantages of greenhouse farming. And so where to buy them? There are a number of companies that really sell greenhouse tunnels. Some of them are companies like VegTech, Greenhouse Technologies, Bosman van Zyl, Dickler Tunnels. There's a lot of suppliers out there in the market, and there are innovative farmers that just tend to decide to build them themselves, if they've got the blueprint, and they would rather just get their own steel and plastics and their own tools and the wires and the cables, and really would put them up themselves. And so if you're that resourceful, I encourage you to do so. But I think if you really want to go commercial, you really have to think hard about the infrastructure that you're going to put in. And so doing a DIY approach, especially if you're not sure what you're doing, I wouldn't advise that. You definitely want to get specialized companies that have experience constructing greenhouses, because at the end of the day, you may just want to insure it or put them part of your farm contents when you're insuring your farm as a property or as a business. And so insurance is going to be very strict in terms of who and how the tunnels were constructed. So I definitely advise seeking experts and getting a good contractor to really put them up for you so that they could last long. The last thing you want is when you are experiencing windy month, for example, like August, if you're in South Africa, it can get quite windy. And so the last thing you want is for your tunnels to be blown over and then your production is exposed. And so I really, really recommend contacting any of the companies I mentioned. You can even just search online, greenhouse suppliers or greenhouse farming, or you could just buy your materials from various suppliers and get a contractor to assemble that for you. So it's entirely up to you and based on your budget. And then what factors to consider when buying a greenhouse tunnel? I think firstly, you need to understand what type of crop you want to farm. Typically, the standard here in South Africa is that when you're farming in greenhouses, you definitely want to go into the high value crops or high value production. And those will typically be your peppers, red, green, and yellow, which is your sweet peppers, your cucumbers, and your tomatoes, whether it's normal tomatoes or cherry tomatoes. But those are the top three crops that the industry is typically known for when you're producing a greenhouse, because you really want to maximize every square meter on your farm and on your land, ensuring that these high value crops get the highest yield so that you could get a very good price in the market. And when you think about these crops, peppers, cucumbers, and tomatoes, they're quite sensitive crops, and so you really need them to be under protection, to be free from pests and diseases as much as possible. But it is quite an intensive production. You really need a good, strong team that is hands-on, that knows what they're doing, that knows when and how to trellis peppers as and when it needs to, that knows when to harvest this, that knows when to take care of the crops throughout the entire production cycle. And so these are just the factors to consider when you're deciding to buy on greenhouses. Secondly, definitely get your materials from a reputable supplier. Like I said, you have the choice to buy the materials from a different company and then getting a contractor to assemble it for you. Or some companies will just obviously supply you with the materials and then also have an in-house team that can assemble that for you. So another part is that the tunnels come in various sizes. And I think you just need to do as much research as you can. For example, the tunnels that we have on our farm is a 10 by 50 per bay. So there's there's single tunnels that you could buy, or multi-span tunnels. You can buy 10 by 50 or 10 by 30. Industry standard is a 10 by 30 tunnel. You need to make sure that they have got good UV protection and a plus minus 200 micron. I think that's the industry standard. And so you want to ensure that the tunnels are durable, that could last you for about 3 to 5 years. And then from there on, you're just doing the minor maintenance, and that during hail season, your crop is protected. And so I think 200 micron would be a good one to go. And so it also depends on, per farmer. Some farmers prefer their tunnels to face east to west. Some farmers prefer to put their tunnels at like a 45-degree angle, depending on where the sun sets and the sun rises on their farms. And all of this is, again, also dependent on the type of crop that you're farming. So, I think there's no one size fits all in farming. You have to just do what's best for your farm. But then again, I think if you're considering to put up greenhouse infrastructure, you need to think of what crop am I farming, what angle should my tunnels be placed in my farm, how many of them could I fit in, should I buy single greenhouse tunnels or multi-span tunnels. The advantage of single greenhouse tunnels is that you are separating the crop that is produced under a specific tunnel as opposed to the rest. So for example, if you're finding a pest infestation or a disease in that specific tunnel, at least the rest of your production might not be affected, as opposed to when you have in multi-span tunnels. Multi-span tunnels pretty much covers one big layer of your crops, and then you could just walk right through underneath your production. And so when your crops are infested by any form of pest or disease or fungi, whatever the case is, it could rapidly spread to the other bays if it's not controlled and carefully managed on time. And so these are just some of the disadvantages of either having a single greenhouse tunnel or multi-span tunnels. But I think before you make any form of investment, especially with greenhouses, speak to your agronomist. And the agronomist, like I've said in many other shows before this one, is that they will assist you in your production plan, what to grow, when to grow, what to use as fertilizers, the different seasons in which you must grow the specific crop, and which months to start producing in that crop. So speak to your agronomist and they will tell you, okay, maybe this would do well in the greenhouse, etc. And also, I think I forgot to mention that, not every area is best for greenhouses. For example, for some farmers, investing in greenhouses is just a waste of time for them because they are in a very hot climatic region. And so, for example, when the temperatures increase about to 40, 45 degrees, having a greenhouse might not be the viable options because your plants might suffocate in that greenhouse, irrespective of how good of a ventilation system you have. So this is another factor that you need to consider to say, based on my region, do I really need greenhouses? Should I invest in tunnels? How would my crop perform during the months of November to February, when temperatures can increase and really go up to 40 to 45 degrees. So I think do extensive research, consult as many people as possible, but not too much where you get confused at the end of the day. But I think it's, as with anything in farming, always start small. Trial and error is the best, because you have to measure certain milestones that you achieve on your farm. And so I think if you want to invest in one tunnel, that would be great. If you find a supplier that can maybe assist you by renting a tunnel before you buy a tunnel, that will also be great. And then you just trial or test a specific crop under that tunnel and see how it performs. And then if you're happy with the results or the yields, then I definitely think that you could go expand on a much larger or commercial scale for your production. The other question here that we mostly receive, especially when it comes to greenhouses, is basically what crops to farm. And I think I mentioned that the typical industry standard ones that come top of mind when you are producing under greenhouses is your peppers, your cucumbers, and your tomatoes. These are high value crops. There are other farmers who are producing flowers in greenhouses, cut flowers, and this is all dependent on their market as well. There are farmers who are producing herbs also under greenhouses. And then there are also some other farmers who rotate their crops with green beans. A specific variety that I know of is called Salamanca, which basically grows vertically instead of it being in a bush. And so you can farm green beans also under the tunnel. And then there are many other farmers who put spinach under their tunnels as well, or leafy crops under their tunnels. It could be their main crop, or it just could be a seasonal or rotational crop, especially during the winter months. So these are just some of the crops, but you definitely want to put high value crops under your tunnels, because they would get you the highest yield or returns per square meter in that tunnel. And what I mean by that is that per kilogram in the market, it will fetch a higher price as opposed to selling spinach, for example. So for example, I think spinach for a kilogram, we could say, hypothetically speaking, could be about 6 Rand a kilogram, and or a bunch of spinach. And then if you had to, let's say, get green peppers, depending on your client, they would offer you anything between 12 Rand and 18 Rand, depending on where and whom you're selling to. And so these are just the price differences. And then if you go very niche with red and yellow peppers, this past winter season, it fetched up as high as about 30 Rand a kilogram. So you could do the maths yourself, whether it's 30 Rand per kilogram as opposed to 6 Rand per kilogram for a bunch of spinach. So I think you really need to be strategic in the type of crop you're farming, and there's nothing wrong in changing, especially when you reach the winter season, with any leafy crop, because it's a short season crop, just to keep the farm going and operational. And I must also mention that under greenhouse farming, you have the option to farm directly in the soil or using growing bags, like we're farming, which is some form of a hydroponic system, or farming in the normal wide PVC pipes, which is another form of a hydroponic system. And so when you're farming in growing bags, you obviously need growing medium, so a substitute to soil. And some farmers use sawdust, some farmers use cocoa peat, some farmers use vermiculite. Again, I think it's a conversation that one needs to have with the agronomist based on your farm strategy and your farm's business plan. Otherwise, you can also build up on greenhouses and farm directly on the soil. But again, I must emphasize that you need to have done your soil test, make sure that there are no soil-borne diseases, any nematodes in the soil, so that you can get your highest yield per your production. And so these are just some of the crops that you can farm. And lastly, what sort of maintenance is needed in greenhouse farming? This entirely depends on how you have performed the season, or how well you've maintained your farm throughout the growing season. And what I mean by that, some farmers get affected by hail, where the hail was too strong enough, or hailstorm balls were too big enough, and then started, punching holes through the micron plastic. And so sometimes some farmers, depending on how severe the hole is, you could use a specialized sellotape for that greenhouse plastic, and then you could just patch it up. Or if the damage is too excessive, then you might have to replace over that arc, or depending whichever way in whichever area where the plastic was affected. And note that not all greenhouses have to be 100% covered in your plastic. There are some greenhouses, again, depending on the type of infrastructure you've put in and what type of crop you'll be farming. Some farmers have a mixture of nets as well as plastic, so that the net can protect the plastic, especially when there are very heavy rains or very heavy hailstorms. And so the other maintenance that you have to do is basically inside the crop, inside the greenhouse, making sure that your irrigation system is still on par. If you're using drip irrigation or what we call spaghetti irrigation, just making sure that your pipes aren't clogged. So this is just the daily maintenance that your team just needs to look out for or scout for. And then, if there's any bended hoops or wires or pillars, you definitely need to rectify that as soon as possible, so that your whole infrastructure doesn't fall down. I think, again, some farms have the type of greenhouses where there are flaps that open and close, which when it's very hot, you can open the flap in front, and then when the temperature is cool, you could close it. So sometimes you find that flap breaking off on the edges or on the sides, and then that's just also some of the maintenance that you have to do. But it's just ensuring that as you're going about your daily routines, and as your workers or your employees are working on the farm, if you spot any problem, or a screw missing, or a lever not in its right place, just definitely fix that. The last thing you want is just to leave your tunnels abandoned for long, because that's when the more damage will happen on your infrastructure. So anything that you see that is not sitting right, definitely fix it, and rather make those small adjustments or small maintenance procedures on your farm on a daily basis, as and when it needs to be, as opposed to when the whole infrastructure is really severely damaged and you might have to replace that in its entirety, which can be very, very expensive exercise. And so I hope I've covered most of your questions today. And once again, I'd like to apologize for the technicalities that we had earlier on, but thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for your participation. And I wish you all the best with the remaining days that we have for the year end, now that we're in lockdown level 3. So try to enjoy the last few days of 2020 as best as you can, whether you're with family or friends. And I will definitely see you next year. Hope we make it, all of us. Stay home and stay safe, and stay home. Thank you so much.